Hello everyone, this is John from Western Maine Defensive Tactics. Today we're going to talk about the Schrade SCHF 19L double-edged boot knife and double-edged knives in general. Now, for $15 or $20, this is a pretty good value of a knife. It's kind of a modern version of the aluminum-handled stainless steel boot knives of the 70s and 80s. Most of those were copies of a Gerber Mark I. I had the K-Bar Black Beauty like this one. And they were pretty good knives for what they were. Gerber made quite a few of them. Pretty much every decent manufacturer, good manufacturer, made a version of an aluminum-handled boot knife in that time. Now, the commonly accepted thought or groupthink regarding double-edged knives is that they're not useful as utility tools, they're just a thrusting weapon, and I think this might be for a couple of different reasons. And I think the primary one is legality. In most places, it's not legal to carry a double-edged knife. This is changing slowly as different jurisdictions pull their head from their ass with regard to knives. Most people have been conditioned to obey and are sensitive to the perception of others. They don't want to be seen as carrying a dagger, or if I get caught carrying a dagger, I'm going to be in extra trouble. I'll have to go on double secret probation, that sort of thing. The problem being is if a knife doesn't get carried, it doesn't get used, and if you're not going to carry and use a knife, there's no need to sharpen it. So the edges that are dull tend to stay dull. They don't get sharpened. So you don't realize that the knife can actually be sharp and put to work. And through that process, kind of like what happened to the Bowie knife over years or for many decades, it's easy for a knife to get misunderstood, misinterpreted, and the use of which forgotten. It just becomes a cool knife that sits in a drawer, and it's not a real knife to some people because they can't sharpen it up, carry it, and use it. And the double-edged knife, or its history in this country, anyway, kind of parallels the history of the Bowie knife in that regard. I think people have forgotten that the double-edged knife is actually useful. I'm not going to say it's the most useful knife and that you should always choose one as a utility knife. Not quite. But part of what also makes the double-edged knife, I guess, misunderstood or maligned for utility purposes is the grind. A lot of times they're made from pretty thick steel. If you look at the steel on this Gerber, that's 1/4 of an inch thick. Most of them are 3/16 inch or better thickness. And this is not quite 3/16. It's a little under. Now, let's say you have a 3/16 inch thick piece of steel, 1 inch wide, and you grind a flat grind from the back, a single edge from the back down to the edge. That's going to make that taper much more gradual and the edge thinner, making it somewhat easier to sharpen, and its capability for slicing a lot better than if it was thick. What you do with a double-edged knife is you basically half that distance, of course. You start with a 1/2 inch and you taper an edge on each side, which means each bevel is more abrupt. And to add to injury to insult, usually the secondary bevel on top of that is fairly blunt, meaning that the knife doesn't cut well generally as delivered from the factory. I think we can do a little bit better though. But most people are, I guess, even the makers are content to make a dagger like that, or a double-edged knife like that, because that's what has become the norm. It's what people expect. It's what people will accept. But I think in that regard, a full flat grind with a sharpened false edge might be a better way to go. And it will basically be a little bit more socially acceptable if you're into that sort of thing, and make some people piss their pants a little bit less. Okay, but I've never really been one to accept convention. As I said before, when I was growing up, I had a K-Bar boot knife like this one. Not this particular knife. My knife I gave to one of my best friends. It's down in Texas right now, hopefully in his boot, in his belt, doing what it should do. This is a copy of it that I found that another friend of mine had for sale, and I bought it just basically for old time's sake. I had this knife when I was 10 or 12. I used it out in the woods quite a bit. I didn't sharpen it a lot, because I didn't want to ruin the finish. Go figure. I just used it for point work and things like that. And I found it somewhat useful. And I wanted to revisit that. So I bought 2 of these Schrade boot knives. Again, $15, $20, a really good value. And I sharpened one up the way I thought it should be sharpened. Sharpened so it would cut. And I use this for as a utility tool, doing all my chores with it, as a carry knife. Cut a lot of steak, some chicken, ate with it, whittled, cut open my hay bales, did all my chores with it for a couple months, and I still use it now occasionally because I've actually gotten to like it. And it works pretty well. The only thing that is a real drawback is if you're accustomed to putting a thumb or a forefinger, I did that backwards, didn't I? A thumb or forefinger on the back of a blade for extra leverage when cutting, well, you're going to learn that you probably shouldn't do that. It's going to be a self-correcting action. At the same time, with a short blade like this, it's not really going to be that much of a handicap because you can get pretty good leverage on this blade to cut. Just to demonstrate, I have a Mora here, Mora Clipper, I believe. And let's whittle with it a little bit. Cuts pretty good, doesn't it? Let's try out a double-edged knife. Well, that cuts pretty good too, doesn't it? People will tell you that a double-edged knife won't cut. Well, guess what? If you give it proper edge geometry, it will cut. I don't think anybody will disagree with me there. If properly sharpened, it will cut. And get all my wood chips out of the way. So, why don't edges come like this from the factory? Well, one particular maker, Cold Steel, does, or at least used to make a pretty good dagger. They still make the Taipan, but I believe it's the Peacekeeper or the Peacemaker. The Peacekeeper. They made, I think it was back in the 90s, they had the Kraton handle, carbon 5 blade, blackened. Very wide, very thin grind on it. Man, those knives cut great. I wish I'd bought more. I wish I still had mine. But there are advantages to a double-edged knife that maybe you'd have to think about a little bit to be seen. And people talk on and on about Scandi grinds and bushcraft. Why can't we have a 1/8 inch thick or 3/32 inch thick double-edged knife? It would be very lightweight, and a Scandi grind on either edge. Why not that? That would be a great knife because you could have one edge to work with, and when it got dull, turn it over and have another, backup edge. You could run let's say a thicker knife, 3/16, have a nice fine edge like this edge is, and have a more blunt edge on that side for doing rough work, or a nice razor sharp edge on this edge and a serrated edge on that. It would be good to have a differential edge. What about having a double convex edge? Because convex edges are pretty handy too. Why not? Straight and serrated looks pretty good to me, or sounds pretty good to me. Also remember that the narrow profile of this, with a narrow blade, means a narrow sheath, and it's a little bit easier to conceal, but we'll get into that in a later video. We'll talk about sheaths and all that stuff. What this knife has going for it, the Schrade, it's got a really good handle made of TPE, basically a hard rubberized plastic. Reasonable blade. I chose this knife because I like the blade shape. It's got a pretty functional guard. It's not going to stop an incoming blade, but that's not what we're talking about with this knife. This knife, the guard on this is just to keep your hand off the blade, and it will do that. The steel is okay. It's a Chinese equivalent of basically a 420 stainless. The heat treatment isn't awesome. The knife is easy to sharpen. I'll say that the knife is easy to sharpen and gets pretty sharp. I mean, if this may or may not shave. See if I have any hair left. Oh yeah, she'll shave. Shave pretty easy. It'll shave. But if you use it quite a bit, you're going to have to sharpen it fairly often. I found after, let's say, 8 or 10 hay bales or a bunch of baler twines, I'd have to resharpen it. But resharpening took 3 minutes. It was no big deal. If you use it and kept the stone handy, you'd be perfectly happy with it. Ideally, you'd have a good carbon steel that held an edge a little longer, but that's pretty picky for a $20 knife or $15 knife if you can get it on sale. And overall, I like this knife. I'm satisfied with it. The drawbacks of it, well, and I've watched a couple different reviews on this particular knife. People seem to be very impressed with the sheath. The sheath, in my opinion, is complete junk. Let me tell you why. As delivered, this sheath is adequate for this knife as it's delivered. Let me rephrase that. This sheath will be fine with this knife as they deliver it to you. They don't deliver it razor sharp. It's scraping sharp, and this sheath is fine for that. The problem with this sheath, one of the problems anyway, is that there's no welt. There's a piece of leather, or let's say two flat pieces of leather, that basically serve to secure that clip and make one side of the sheath and the part of the thumb brake. Then this piece of leather is molded to make a channel for the knife. There is no welt to protect you from the protect the stitching or you from the edge of the knife. This edge is not that sharp, so that's fine. Now, this knife is quite sharp. It'll cut its way out of the sheath in a heartbeat if you're not careful resheathing it or in a fall or something like that. That's not the way to make a sheath. The next problem with this sheath has to do with the clip. And a lot of people say, oh yeah, that's a nice firm clip. That'll stay on my belt. No, it won't. If you look right here, there should be a 90-degree angle in that clip. There's just a smooth slope. What will happen with this is, it'll slide right on your belt real easy, and you'll be out in the woods or getting in and out of your truck or something like that. And it will always happen, probably in public, probably when you're carrying this knife where, someplace where you're not legally, quote-unquote, allowed to, the word I hate, and something will catch and the knife will just come right off because of the lack of the 90-degree angle there. If you want to see a sheath that's made correctly for a boot knife, look no further than this K-bar sheath. If you look at this, there's a good welt here, there's a good welt there. That edge, no matter how sharp, won't contact the stitching or you. Good thumb brake. And look at the belt clip on this. That's a nice 90-degree angle. I put this in the sheath, put it on my belt, and that is not coming off. I cannot pull that off. I really can't get two hands on it, but I cannot pull that off because of that angle. That's the way a clip should be. But I'll also go on record saying that I don't really like clips. They've failed me at just about every occasion I've used. This doesn't, this clip and all clips pretty much all suffer from walking. They walk on the belt back and forth. When the belt's on your body, they walk less than this. With a wider belt, they walk less, but they still walk. You want that knife, especially if it's a defensive tool, to be in the same place every time you go to grab for it. You don't want it migrating on your belt. But this is the way this type of sheath should be made, in my opinion. This, okay, it covers the blade, but the sheath is going to be the weak point. But again, this is a pretty good knife for 20 bucks. I won't mind making a sheath for it if that's the one I choose. Now, if you want to get serious about this sort of knife, you need to have a Kydex sheath for it. Kydex, like a inside the waistband draw point type sheath. That's going to run you more than the knife. It'll probably run you $40, $50 depending on who you have make it. But let's say I was very serious about this knife. I really liked it. And I was really serious about carrying this particular double-edged knife. I would buy 3 of these. I'm 2/3 of the way there right now. The first knife I would take, put a razor edge on both edges, set it aside. That's my carry knife. The second knife I'd take and put a razor edge on both edges. That second knife, that is going to be my test cutting and the knife I'm going to use on the Pell. And my magic third knife, I'm going to take to a grinder or a file and take the edges off. That's going to be my blunt trainer. All 3 knives will fit the same sheath. So I have a knife to carry that I don't beat up in training, that stays very, very sharp. I have a knife that I could use as a utility tool. I could use it on the Pell for all my test cutting, get used to the design, understand what the knife is capable of. A knife to beat on a little bit. And then a knife that's blunt I could do my partner and interactive work with. It would cost you a little bit of money, but you'd have a pretty nice little system there when it all got worked out. And if you lost one, hey, no big deal. You made the investment in the sheath, get another one. These go on sale at Bud K or whatever for $10 or $15. Buy a few. It's not a bad idea. Okay, let's kind of wrap up a little bit. double-edged knives aren't useless if you sharpen them well. You have an instant spare edge. This one goes dull. I turn it over. Boop. I have an instant spare. I can run a differential edge. I can sharpen this one very, very sharp, a 0 edge, and have a more blunt edge here. Useful for different chores. I can run a straight and serrated edge. I can do a variety of things. They don't quite get the attention that they need because of the legal stigma put on them, I think. And you know that if it's a bigger knife, like this large one, if I have a knife that's going to be this big anyway, taking up that much real estate, I want a Bowie knife, because a Bowie knife is that much better than a dagger, in my opinion. The blade shape isn't ideal for all the chores that you're going to have to do. There's no belly on this, so if you're going to do a lot of belly chores, you're going to end up doing it with, right out on the tip of the blade, that sort of thing. Might be a little bit tedious, but it does have good usable straight edge, a good point, and if you reprofile the blade, or reprofile the edge, it cuts pretty well. You saw that. And I also think that, as blademen, we need to know how to use a variety of different knives, because you'll have people probably in this video that will get on me about double-edged knives are stupid. You're stupid if you carry one. You can't use a a knife with a double guard for bushcraft chores. It just doesn't work, blah, 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 blah. I'm like, well, if you need a specialized tool for every little task, you kind of ruin yourself as a knife exponent. You should know what the proper tools are, but be able to make just about any tool there is work. And I think the double guard is a great asset on just about any knife, particularly a defensive knife. Because, hey, when my tendonitis flares up, sometimes my grip is compromised. And you're not always at your best. Like I've said before in different videos, the guard covers you when you can't cover yourself. It makes up for your weakness. Maybe you get tired from fighting. Maybe you have hand fatigue. I've had a couple of different hand injuries the last couple of years that really compromised my grip. I don't have that big crush grip I used to have just probably 2 years ago. And things happen. We all get old. Remember that our forefathers used double-edged knives. If you look in, Knife and Homespun America, and a lot of your antique knife books, a lot of those knives are double-edged, and they're not all pristine either. They've been sharpened, they've been used. Our forefathers knew how to use double-edged knives, and they chose them for good reasons. And today, it's almost a blessing and a curse. We have an endless variety of knives that are, in a historical sense, really good quality, very, very cheap. And we can choose any of those, and they tend to be specialized for a few different tasks. And we're almost spoiled by that, because we never have to say, hey, you have 1 or 2 knives, that's all you can afford, that's all you have. You need to make those knives work and last for your lifetime, or until you can earn enough money to buy another one, because knives are a valuable commodity, and they're a tool that does hard work every day. We're almost spoiled, because if I don't like this knife, I can go grab this one. If I don't like this one, I can get online and order another one, So I don't think sometimes that we spend the time to really master the knives that we have to the level that we should, because we can always get a more specialized tool. Again, the double-edged knife may not be your first choice for utility. I think if you're looking for a finer cutting edge, a little bit more weight up front for slashing, that the full flat grind with a sharpened false edge is probably a better idea. This Command 1 is kind of like that, but it's real thick steel, and they start with a grind that comes from the center line. So up here, all this weight is, okay, yeah, you have slashing weight out front, but this is kind of wasted thickness. It's wasted material. A full flat grind and then a false edge, and this would be an awesome little knife. I'd love it. But also remember that this might be a good knife, well, not as a primary knife, but say a tertiary knife. Not saying that you only carry 3 knives, but let's say a peripheral knife. A knife that is not a primary knife, not even a secondary knife, not even an auxiliary folder, but one you carry like I do, like on the outside layer of your clothing in cold weather. Like I put this in my my gaiters on the outside of my pants a lot, and use that when I'm bundled up in the winter out in the snow for cutting hay bales or quick cuts. What do I have to do? Cutting baler twine off the snowblower and stuff like that. You know, things I don't want to dig down in clothing to get a folder, or I don't want to use my other knife. You know, you can use this basically as a beater. And the double-edged knives are generally a bit thick. That's where their abrupt edge bevels kind of shine with a little bit rougher work. You'll maybe get a little edge damage because the steel isn't quite so hard as it should be. But in some of them, like this K-bar, I'm kind of worried about this one chipping because it feels a little bit hard to me. And someday I might sharpen this up just to see how sharp it will get. I bet it will get very, very sharp. But I kind of don't want to ruin it because I like it because it's the same kind of knife I had when I was a kid. But again, it might not be your first choice, but consider it. Because there are things that a double-edged knife will do well. And this might not stick quite as well as a well-designed clip point, but it's going to do pretty well. It's going to do pretty well. But, all right. The only other thing I haven't talked about is this knife here. This is the large, I think they call this the Neal dagger or whatever. Basically, this is a cheapskate's version of the Gerber Mark II. Which is okay. And this knife comes, this is one of the few knife reviews you'll see from me that have the boxes, because usually I throw the boxes away first. I haven't sharpened this one. This is as it is. I've just handled it and fooled around with it a little bit. Comes pretty pointy, but dull. I mean, it's dull. I mean, I can pick up some shavings maybe. Yeah, I can pick up a couple of shavings. But that's about it. The handle is a bit slimmer and a bit longer than on the big boot, than on the call this the other boot knife because it's technically the larger one, but you know, it's 3/4 of an inch longer and maybe 1/8 of an inch thicker, but the handle is not too small. It's not bad. Serrations are semi-sharp. There's not even an edge down here next to the ricasso, and you know, you could wrap this with tape and sharpen this up and it would be okay. But again, you can find this for $20, I think. Even less sometimes. But these, I might get a couple more of these and work with them. I might get something else different. I might get the Smith & Wesson hostage rescue boot knife or whatever it is. Basically, it's the same knife. It's just a different blade stamp. Maybe some minor variations. You know, that sort of thing. They're made in a variety of different configurations. They're all made in China. They all run $15 to $20. Sometimes you can find them cheaper. They throw real well. That's how I took the point off this, you know. But they're a fun knife, and I'm, you know, as money gets tighter and tighter, I look at, though I can make any knife I want, $10, $20, hey, that's not too bad. A good knife for a stash, good knife to train with, good knife to do some chores with. But don't sell the double-edged knife short. Granted, it's probably not going to be your first-tier all-purpose blade, but also thinking that it's completely useless or thinking that somebody with a double-edged knife is stupid is a mistake. I've met a few, granted a very few people over the years that are very well versed in using a double-edged knife for anything, as well as defending themselves. Some of you might be old enough to remember the old A.G. Russell Sting. Not the Sting 1A, the all-steel one, the old Sting one, the old Sting, with the micarta handles made in Germany. Those were really, really nice knives. And I haven't examined enough of them to know, but I met somebody that had 2 of them. And I'm not sure if he reground the edges or not. If he reground the edges, they were very well done. And these knives were, you know, A.G. Russell will tell you, or says I think there's a video out of it, but I think I read this someplace too, that he said he wanted 2 straight razors put together back to back. And that's what this knife was. And I'm not sure, honestly, if that's the way they delivered them back then or if that's a modification this guy made. But he had 2 of these things carried concealed. And they were like straight razors. And he could do basically any knife chore with these with no problem at all. And he was very well versed with using one in each hand. And it was a neat thing to see because you just don't see it that often. It is not commonly done. Because a knife like this is perceived as a deadly weapon to authorities, even though they don't even understand it. Even though that in most cases, a single-edged knife with proper edge geometry will outcut this. But I digress. Don't sell the double-edged knife short. if you're willing to do some work with, say, file and stones, you can get a pretty good edge on quite a lot of the cheaper ones. I probably wouldn't do it to a Gerber or my K-bar. It's just, this was something fun to do and a neat experiment. And hey, I mean, when you grab, it gives you options when opening hay bales. With a square bale, you have 2 strings. You can grab both, cut it. You can grab one, cut one, cut the other. You've got 2 edges. It's kind of fun to fool with. Something else I haven't mentioned is coal seal push dagger. And I'm not sure if I was going to go with a push dagger, if I'd go double edge or single edge. Because the coal steel single edge push dagger, I have an old one that's just, it's been has a savage edge on it. It has a great edge. And these aren't bad. And there are those that will tell you that a push dagger is useless for utility as well. It's just not true. You put a good edge on it, and you can do, I mean, I don't want to, you know, I'm not going to carve a canoe with this, but I can do reasonable work with it. You know, if we had a bit of a flat there, a dirt kind of grind, it would be fine. But look at this. This is a nice, wide, fairly thin at the edge, made to cut, but will still puncture and pierce. So it's not as useless as people will tell you with it. And guess what? If all you had was double-edged knives and the ability to sharpen, you would learn pretty quick how to make things happen with a double-edged knife. So don't sell them short. And I haven't even talked about like big double-edged knives like the Smash It. You know, those are in a completely different class than the smaller. You know, these are more of an EDC utility blade, in my opinion. But a Smash It, no, it's not a Bowie knife, but they're pretty fun to mess with too. And on another note, before I prattle on anymore, I noticed that I've got about 500 subscribers, and that really surprises me that that many people want to listen to me prattle about knives and guns and things like that. It's kind of humbling. So thank you guys that have subscribed. I really appreciate it, and I'll try to put out some more content to you a little bit more consistently now that I've got my technical difficulties worked out. You guys take care. Thanks for watching.